Warning, this video contains spoilers for Deltarune's chapters 1 and 2. This may also spoil future chapters. Watch at your own risk. Now, I could bore you with all the details of Deltarune and talking about how magnificent of a game it is, thank you Toby Fox. However, I would like to just get right to the chase. Welcome to the Chess Theory video. This is by far, I think, the only theory that I've managed to craft with the most amount of solid backing to it, that not only has evidence for present chapters, but future chapters as well. So let's start with the backing theory behind Chess Theory, the value of chess pieces. In Chapter 1, we faced off against a Chaos King. In chess, the King piece happens to have a basically infinite number of points. Sometimes it's rounded down to 4. However, for this comparison, most of the time it's seen as an infinite piece. In Chapter 2, we faced off against the Queen. The Queen is actually the second one with 9 points. So what does this imply for future chapters? This would mean that the next piece in order would be the Rook, 5 points. This would mean that whoever Mike is has to be an analogy for the Rook piece. Now here's the interesting part. The Bishop and the Knight have an equal amount of points value. They both are worth 3 points. I think what's going to happen with the next chapters in chapters 4 and 5 is that the Bishop is going to come first and then the Knight. I actually based this off the thought that because Toby Fox is going to be releasing chapters 3, 4, and 5 all together, it makes sense that for the next release of Deltarune, the Knight is the final boss of chapter 5. It perfectly encapsulates a sense of finality for that trilogy of chapters that we're going to get next. If you needed a little bit more evidence to support the chess theory, take a look at Chaos King and the Queen. Chaos King represents the king piece. In chess, a king will only come into play once they're threatened, and kings don't tend to move much as a result. Just like in Deltarune, the king doesn't actually move from the castle, he's always inside it. He only comes into play once he's confronted with the Lightners. Now in contrast, in Chapter 2, the Queen piece moves everywhere, just like how in Chapter 2, the Queen is present at basically every moment. They're from the start, they're throughout the middle, and they're at the end. She constantly moves and never stops. The Queen piece in chess can move wherever it wants, which perfectly encapsulates the personality of the Queen. So where does this leave us with Mike, the Rook? This is actually a bit interesting. Rooks typically only come into play in chess once the pawn in front of it has fallen. Pawns can be a way to refer to someone as a puppet. And we have a relation between Mike and a puppet. Spamton. Now I will say, the Spamton thing is a bit of a stretch. This is the only part of the theory that has no solid backing behind what we know so far. And I'd be totally fine if it was just something that ends up getting disproven. Whatever. What matters though is that Mike is a rook, has a pawn, and that pawn is Spamton, and the pawn has fallen, leaving Mike to come in and take the role as Chapter 3 antagonist. It's also interesting to note that the rook piece can actually move if the knight has moved. The pawn in front of it does not need to have fallen. One interesting side effect of chess theory is that we can basically predict how the future chapter is going to play out. We already had Chapter 1 and 2 play out with the King and Queen piece. Chapter 3 is going to play out with the Rook being Mike. But I think where the true juice of this theory is going to lie is how we can use this to line up what's going to happen in chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7. Now I'm going to be honest, I could not find anything about Chapter 5. Chapter 5 would be the Knight chapter. It would make sense why that one would be the most obscure. Toby has some tricks up his sleeve. I have managed to find some information though about what chapters 4 and 6 could be. 7 is also in a similar state to 5, in which it's a bit of a weird conundrum. I will say one thing. I think the plot point of the Roaring, the Prophecy, and the Knight will end in Chapter 5. That's gonna sound crazy, but if you hear it out, it makes sense as a Toby Fox move to pull. Chapter 4, I can confidently say, is going to be about the church in town. It makes sense. The bishop is a religious-related piece. And if you go by the theory that the Dark Worlds are based on methods of escapism, Chapter 1 being playing games, Chapter 2 being the internet, Chapter 3 being television, then I think religion is going to be a very interesting Dark World. And I believe it's going to be involved with Rudy. Rudy is basically on the brink of death. He has been recovering, but I feel like there's going to be a major twist that occurs during Chapter 3's Light World segments, where it turns out that his condition has gotten even worse, and I'm going to bet that Noelle is going to get desperate. I mean, she literally makes explicit references a few times that she wishes she knew healing magic so she could just heal Rudy. This is probably going to be a major plot element of Chapter 4. It's also worth noting that Rudy mentions that he might be well enough to go to church tomorrow, also known as probably in the Chapter 3 Light World segment after he finished the Dark World, which actually perfectly segues to Chapter 4 being in the Bishop World. Now, I'd also like to mention the idea of how the Deltarune classmates, specifically the ones that aren't returning from Undertale, are going to be likely party members or will be part of the journey for characters. We already see Noelle and Berdly in Chapter 2. I think Caddy is going to be involved in Chapter 4, and Jockington might be tagging along, and we'd probably see the two also be involved in other chapters as well, such as 6. I think it totally makes sense that Caddy is going to join in Chapter 4. Caddy's a fan of the occult, and even researched it with Chris. Totally makes sense for her to join in on a religious Dark World. Now I hope you guys are ready, because Chapter 6 I think is going to be the wildest chapter. So, I believe it's going to be in Asgo's Flower Shop. There's a Dark World door at the back. It's going to be obvious. But, I think the events that are going to occur in Chapter 6 will be ones that are going to be truly incredible. There is now no more night to deal with. There is only one thing left, the pawns. Now, something interesting that can happen in chess is you can promote your pawn piece, and you can promote it to basically any piece. I know that people say that you can only promote it to queens, but you can basically promote them to any piece in normal chess rules. So, I don't think Chris is the knight yet. Chris will be promoted to a knight. Traditionally, there are 8 pawns in chess. In Asgo's Flower Shop, there are 7 flowers, all based off the human souls, and they all share the same traits. The only trait that does not have a specific colored flower to it is the golden flower, which is meant to represent determination. And if we know Undertale, there is 2 determination souls in there, Chara's and Frisk's. In Deltarune, we have the golden flower, and we have Chris. Chris is a pawn, just like all the other classmates that we will control as part of our party. There's Chris, the one who's primarily determination. Susie, perseverance. Ralsei, kindness. Noelle, bravery. Berdly, justice. Caddy, patience. Jockington, integrity. And the 8th is going to be the vessel. So I may have spitballed there about what flower traits link up with the Lightners, but I think those are the mostly accurate ones I could find. But more importantly, we are going to play as the vessel in Chapter 7, losing control of Chris in Chapter 6. And I totally believe the final confrontation will be the player versus Chris. The context of this is going to change depending on if you did the pacifist route or you did the weird route, but it will totally remain the same as in terms of what happens. The context will just be completely different.